Welcome back to my channel, Sty Stories. Today we're going to talk about 10 ways to stop translating in your head. But make sure not to skip the video or leave, otherwise you may not understand the method. Let's get started. Identify objects around you in English. The first way to stop translating in your head is to identify the objects around you in your target language. So if you're studying English, that means you look at the objects around the room and the things in your life. Don't think of them in your native language first. Think of them in your target language first. So, if I look around the room and see a computer, I shouldn't think of my native language word. I should think of my target language word. Start with the items and situations in your everyday life. If I say computer in English, maybe I should say computer in Japanese. I should say omizu for water in Japanese. Start associating the words in your target language with your everyday life now. If you're studying English, start getting familiar with the things in your everyday life in English. Repeat phrases you hear native speakers use. Tip number 2 is to repeat the phrases that you hear native speakers use. If you're watching this channel, for example, or you're watching a TV show or a movie, listen to the way native speakers make those phrases. If you hear a phrase you have never heard before or an interesting combination of words, try to repeat them yourself. Don't just listen. Try to say them yourself. If you're in a public space and it's difficult for you to do that, fine. Practice in a place where you feel more comfortable. Maybe if you have some private space to practice, just repeat them. Get your mouth used to saying the words the way native speakers do. If you never actually say words, if you're only listening and not producing the language, it's hard to practice and improve your pronunciation. So, when you listen to native speakers, try to repeat after them. For example, if you're studying English, you can try to repeat this video. You can repeat the things I'm saying because maybe I'm using an expression or a series of vocabulary words the way a native speaker would. It's a good idea to practice how native speakers put their words together. Try to repeat after native speakers, especially when you're looking at media. You can do this when you're reading books too. Try to read out loud interesting lines of books or something difficult for you. Very nice practice. Make a situation where you can't escape into your native language. This essentially means immersing yourself. Of course, going to a country or a place where you can speak only that language is difficult for some of you. I totally understand, but if you can create a situation in your life, in your library, in your room, in your house, somewhere, for just an hour or maybe a day, I don't know what your schedule is like, where you have no choice but to use that language and cannot escape into your native language, it forces you to use the language you're studying. If you're lucky enough to live in a country or a place where people speak the language you're studying, great, but you have to interact with people. Put yourself in a place where you have no choice but to speak. It's very hard, scary, and embarrassing at first. But if you find places and environments comfortable for you to make mistakes and ask questions, it's very valuable for your learning process. This is actually something I did. My Japanese wasn't very good for a long time, but I started making friends who couldn't speak English. I did this by finding hobbies. There was a hobby I had. I joined a group, actually a school, where I could learn that hobby, and everything was taught in Japanese. The people in my class spoke mostly Japanese. We would go out for drinks and food late at night or on weekends, and everyone spoke only Japanese. If I couldn't communicate simply in Japanese, I had no hope of keeping that friendship. It forced me to study and think about the words they were using and learn those words and patterns, as well as how to produce them naturally. I was learning the vocabulary words the people around me were using and learning how to apply them myself. That was only possible because I had no escape in those situations. Try to do that even in your house. It's super helpful. Watch TV and movies in your target language without subtitles. Tip number 4 is to watch TV and movies in your target language without subtitles. Watching with subtitles can be beneficial. If I'm watching something, or if you want to watch something with subtitles on, great. But I sometimes find that I think too much about reading the subtitles and forget to listen. Maybe if you've seen a movie in your target language a few times with the subtitles on, try turning the subtitles off. Think about the character's body language and the words they're using. You can always look up words you don't know in a dictionary later. Try to focus completely on how people are using their words. Try not to use subtitles. Play around with it a little. If there's a word difficult to hear, turn on the subtitles in the native language of the movie. For example, when studying Japanese, it's useful when the actual words spoken in Japanese appear on the screen. Sometimes it's easier to catch a word if I see it visually and hear it simultaneously. Another way to explore TV and movies is to turn on closed captions in the native language of the movie. This is sort of 2 points in one. Watch movies without subtitles in your native language, and watch movies with closed captioning in your target language, not your native language. Try these 2 things with TV and movies. Don't bring a dictionary to your lesson. Tip number 5 is don't bring a dictionary to your lesson. Dictionaries, especially electronic dictionaries on our phones, are very convenient and a great resource. However, one thing that really bothers me and is detrimental is when students, during a lesson practicing conversation, reach a point where they don't know the word they want to use. They know it in their native language, but not in their target language. They pull out their dictionary and say to their practice partner, "Just a moment," look it up on their phone, and then say the word. This stops the flow of the conversation. You don't have that ability in a real conversation with a native speaker. Most people, like at a bank, won't wait while you pull out a dictionary. Instead, try a different strategy. If you find a word you don't know in conversation, explain it to your conversation partner. Maybe they know the word. Speaking with a native speaker gives them a chance to teach you a word. I find that when people take the time to teach me a word, I remember it better than just looking it up in a dictionary. Resist using a dictionary during conversation practice. It destroys the flow of the conversation. Instead, practice describing the vocabulary word you want to use. Learn how to ask for a vocabulary word from your partner. Use expressions like, "What's the word that means?" or "Describe the thing that does something." Use your body language and other tools, but try not to use a dictionary in a conversation because it's not realistic. Train responses to common questions. Number 6 is a quick one. Train responses to common questions. For example, a very common question in English is, "Hey, how are you?" You should know how to answer this question with a default response like, "I'm good." If it takes you a long time to answer, you need to practice. For example, sometimes I ask students a question and they haven't quite learned how to respond quickly. I say, "Hey, how are you?" And they say, "Yes," then think and say, "I'm good." That's a common question. Think about a default response you can quickly say, like, "I'm good," "I'm okay," or "not bad." Train responses to these common questions. We've got videos, especially beginner-level videos, with example responses. Don't get stuck with these little questions. Train a few responses until they feel natural. It will save you time and help the person asking the question move forward in the conversation. Study with materials that don't provide a translation. The next tip is to study with materials that don't provide a translation. If you're using worksheets, textbooks, or whatever with your target language and native language side by side, it can be useful. However, studying materials only in your target language with simplified explanations in your target language can be better. I'm not saying you should only study in your target language and never use your native language because it can be helpful sometimes to look up a word or understand a grammar point. But, where possible, use materials that provide simplified explanations in your target language. This helps you learn to think about the language in a more basic way. Find materials in your target language for both written and audio-visual content. Consider the level of vocabulary, the speed of speech, and the intended audience. For example, our English in 3 Minutes series uses simple vocabulary and a slower rate of speech. Think about your target language in your target language. Study phrases in addition to single vocabulary words. The next tip is to study phrases in addition to single vocabulary words. Vocabulary is important, but it's useful to see how a word is used in a phrase. For example, the word crazy in English can mean different things depending on the context. It could mean a person who is mentally confused, something really good, or something really bad. Looking at how a word is used in a phrase gives more information about its meaning. Take a look at how people use words and phrases, not just single vocabulary words. You can learn a lot more that way. Do your daily activities in English where possible. The next tip is to do your daily activities in your target language. If you're studying English, try to do some daily activities in English. Think about it when you're doing the activity. For example, think about your everyday activities, the people you meet, and what you're doing. This helps you practice verbs. If you're doing something at work and don't know the verb for draw a picture, you can check a dictionary and find the verb draw. You can find gaps in your knowledge by thinking about your everyday activities in your target language. It's a funny but useful way to study. Use a learner's dictionary for new words. The last tip is to use a learner's dictionary for new words. In English, there are learner dictionaries available. If you find a word you don't recognize, check it in a learner's dictionary. It gives a simple explanation in English of that word. Instead of checking it in your native language, check it in your target language. This helps you understand the word from the language you're studying, not from your native language. Using a learner's dictionary can be really useful. Alright, those are 10 tips to help you stop translating in your head. It can be tough, but with time and practice, you'll get better. I hope these strategies help you with learning any language. Even though this is an English learning channel, these tips work for any language. I hope you find them useful. If you've tried these tips or have other suggestions, please share them in the comments below.